Yes.
All right, to
we're on
Workbench. Workbench. Okay, today's technical workbenchness is nothing to do with sewing machines. We're going to talk about quilts in general.
Is that a real quilt that someone brought in?
Yes, I have to fix it. I get these a lot because somebody that really doesn't know anything about quilts brings them in and says, I have this quilt that my grandmother had or my aunt had. Can you please save it?
Oh.
And so this is one of those.
And you never say no?
I usually give them an outrageous price and hope they say they don't want it done. And then if they take
Are you watching?
and if they take me up on it, then it becomes
Gene,
worth our
40%
time.
off at Joann's. Thank you.
But
Hi,
what you-
Victoria.
What you have on an old quilt a lot of times is you'll notice there's a giant hole in that. And there's more holes over here. There's holes all over in this. See, there's holes
Dollar
there.
General's up front.
It's a very holy quilt. It's been blessed by the.
Oh, it never got quilted.
Well, it was tied.
It's a quilt top.
It was quilted. I actually cut the back off so I could show this to you. So what happens is people will bring these in and say, I want my quilt to be repaired. Now, what I wanted to talk about was
I didn't know you did repairs.
I try to stay away from it. So what happens is, so they want this repaired. So, everybody thinks, well, just sew some new fabric on, sew some patches on it, call it a day. Doesn't work. Because this fabric ripped for a reason. And that's this same fabric over here. So you know that biblical thing, you can't put new wine in an old wine skin?
No.
You never heard that?
No.
Okay. Well, basically, yeah. But the idea is that an old wineskin wears out. You put new wine in, it's going to burst. So when you're repairing an old quilt like this, or so you want to repair an old quilt like this, you can't. Well, I mean, you can, but you can't sew patches on it or extra fabric, because all that's going to happen is where you sew new fabric onto the old fabric, it's just going to rip around the edges of the new fabric, because all the old fabric is still the same. So that brittleness and the weakness of the fabric that's in there is just going to spread to somewhere else. So it doesn't make any sense to try and sew patches on an old quilt. The best thing to do is hit the back with some sort of fusible.
That's what I was going to suggest.
What we're going to do to fix this is we're actually going to go to.
I would try and get it as close as you can with some fusible.
Yeah, we're gonna put this like this rip here. We're gonna put it as close as we can together.
Yeah.
And iron some fusible on the back of it.
Yeah.
And that's all we're gonna do for a repair. Then we're gonna throw it. Then we're gonna throw it on the quilting machine and quilt the whole thing.
Yeah.
And when we quilt it, we're also gonna choose a pattern that's fairly dense, so that if there are rips, they don't spread beyond what we do for quilt stitching.
Oh yeah, that's.
But when you have old quilts that you want to repair, keep in mind it's old fabric. And if the fabric is ripped, you're just going to sew new fabric onto it. It's just going to rip around the new fabric. So a lot of times...
Sewing a fusible underneath it, like a one-to-under or something, will actually help stabilize the old fabric.
And what you can do is like a one-to-under or the fusible, the woven fusible.
Oh, 101?
Yeah, that works well too, because you've got that layer of fabric on it instead of just having like a misty fuse or something.
Yeah,
but all we're going to do is we're just going to fuse some stuff to the back of this. And then we're just going to quilt it up. Because the problem with, like I said, the problem with an old quilt, if you're trying to repair it, is it's all old. Where every rip is old fabric. So that's got a lot of old fabric.
Would you consider just interfacing the whole thing?
You could.
To prevent further?
If you wanted to go to that kind of trouble.
Well, I'm thinking, because the fabric is quite
But
thin.
that's why we're going to quilt it after. Because we're going to put that to
But I'm afraid that could give another tear.
It could, but it's not going to tear beyond the quilting.
That's me. I do overkill. I would interface the entire thing.
Yes,
that fabric is very thin.
But what happens is, so if you want
changes the hand of it. I know.
Well, not just that, but so if you had a quilt pattern like this on there.
Yeah.
If you want to zoom in on that. So let's say, for example, we quilted up with something like this. You get a tear right here. Mm-hmm. It's not going to go past the quilting. Mm-hmm. So by doing a fairly dense quilting pattern, it's going to keep the tears from really starting, because the thread is actually stronger than everything else. We're going to put a batting in it and a good back on it. So anything that does want to tear will be limited to where the quilting's at. So
that was tied.
Yeah,
that's right.
So when we quilt it, and that's the other reason why you want to have your stuff machine quilted, because it will last longer. Because machine quilting, if it does start to rip, limits the size of the damage. Whereas if it's been tied or not quilted, that tear just continues until it is too far. That's why a lot of charities won't take anything unless it's been machine quilted now, because it can be washed and taken care of, and they don't have to worry about it falling apart. So yeah, that's
Okay.
that's today's tech is just
That's
old
it.
fabric.
Yep.
If you're trying to repair it, you're better off just fusing something to the back of it and moving on, because like I said, it's all old fabric. So anything you sew to it is just going to rip around the edges.